You're all set.
Good evening. We'll go ahead and start this meeting tonight. Thank you all for coming. First item on the agenda is consider approving the minutes held from October 14th and the 28th.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of October 14th and 28th.
Motion made second by Bob. All in favor? Leaving a blanket letter to approve a games of chance.
Yep,
I just need a motion and a second that you do approve that they handle those games.
I make a motion we approve the blanket for Game of Chance.
Second by Dave. All in favor? Consider transferring money to pay for the repairs.
No, we got the audit, number 3.
Okay, sorry about that. Then ship right over. Audit, sorry, sir. What's the time?
That's great. From the auditing company here to do the presentation.
All right. I'm going to start with that last letter that was handed out for hearing. So this year we did have some findings. We had supplementary weaknesses. As you'll read further on, states the reason why, which is also what gives the chance for a management response, which Gary and Kelly have responded to. The audit did have a clean opinion, which is a modified opinion, but it did have these 2 findings that we noted during the audit, mostly relating to Kelly coming on as new, coming on with less training than was desirable for that position. Needed more time to assimilate to the different accounting procedures and processes that Oakland has, and some of which are sort of complex. So I think going forward is going to be much different for this coming year. So she has systems in place and changes that have been modified to accommodate that for these agencies. So the first one was just over the financial reporting and closing process to get prepared for the audit, to have the financials in to be materially correct when we came in for audit. So during the audit process, I had many material audit adjustments that had to be made to get them correct. So get the financials correct. So the financials you'll see here have been modified in this report to reflect those audit adjustments. So they've changed quite a bit from certain reports you might have seen at June 30 for the year. So that's the first material weakness. The second one is over cash reconciliations. So it was noted since her start, the cash reconciliations had not been performed accurately to the general ledger. Nothing wrong, nothing fraudulent, nothing irregular. It's just the processes were not in place to perform an accurate reconciliations to the general ledger balance. So in other words, when the bank recs were being performed, they were not matching with the general ledger. They are now, going forward, starting July 1, just not through June 30th. So I worked extensively with her after we did the audit to help assist her from July through now, so that it was corrected. And the balances as of June 30 are correct now. And then as you see, the responses are below each comment that I had. So if there's any questions you guys might have on those.
Yeah, when did we change finance directors?
She actually started the 3rd week of January, I believe. Is that correct? I believe it was, yes, 3rd week of January.
Yeah.
So whatever was being done incorrectly was being done incorrectly from the get-go?
Yes.
Okay. From before the new finance director took over?
Right. Yeah, and if you look at
Starting when the new financial
Yeah.
comes in.
if you look at the management response on it, she received 4 hours of training from the parting finance director. So she was going from a process that was used through the school system or educational systems to municipal, and there was a pretty steep learning curve on that.
Yeah, thank you.
And again, just want to add, nothing missing, nothing, it was just purely a, accounting system adjustments between accounts.
That would raise verbal fire rescue by the United
So if you want
Just hit the switch there, shut that speaker off. White box, by the right.
Perfect. Too many buttons. Sorry about that, Craig.
That's all right. So, building grant. So if you want to go on to the big report, if there's some more questions on the management letter comments, let's to page 13 of the big booklet.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yeah,
Craig?
sure.
Would you two like to have an audit follow along on?
Fine.
Yeah, but what?
Audit follow along on?
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So these, the two statements, page 13 and 14, just illustrate the overall governmental activities as well as the sewer fund in two separate columns there. The governmental activities, of course, as I've stated in past communications to you, are the combination of all your assets that are being capitalized as well as liabilities on the books. So this is not prepared on a budget basis. You're not concerned. This would include changing the amount of debt service over to the debt payables as opposed to the budget basis, reporting those as expenditures. So this reflects more like a business financial would and shows your net equity in total, your net position positive being for the whole town, being at $10,491,000, which is a pretty healthy position. Considering you took on the extra debt for the fire station. So there's nothing else to report on that. Page 14 is just a breakdown of those two funds by revenues and expenses. But what it does on this that's different is it tries to match some revenues versus some of those expenses. So if you look over to the far right column, it presents more of a net figure by department or by activity. So you have some of the revenues that can offset some of those expenditures being applied here. Whereas in other statements, you're not going to see that, or in budget versus actual reports, you're not going to see that. And then again, it comes down to those same net position of the $10,491,000, and then the total net position for the sewer fund down at the bottom being $6,121,000. Now this now these balances are a lot larger than what's going to be on the next statements because of those assets being on the books. So if you look on page 15, you get to what your fund balances going forward are from June 30. And you can see your general fund balance, your first column there, coming down to total fund balances of $3,659,000, of which $1,553,000 is unassigned or unrestricted. And then the others are comprised of your assigned balances and your committed balances of the 491,000. And the breakdown of the total of the individual amounts comprised of that are in your footnotes. So you can see those in the other pages. You can look on page 35 and 36 to see what makes up those large fund balances. So some of these would have been adjusted after you would have seen a preliminary schedule of them at some point. And And then the capital projects funds back on page 15 is just left with 183,000. That's just some remaining funds from the station's construction. Is there any questions on that, on those statements? I can go to page 17, statement 4. And those are your revenues and expenses after the audit adjustments. And again, coming down to the fund balances that were over on the page 15. So the $3,659,000 total. So overall, that was an increase in total fund balances of $468,513 for the year. So despite some changes after March with COVID hitting, we still ended up with a positive balance. And then on the capital projects fund, you'll see the large decrease, but that is because of the large amount of the fire station construction costs coming through to bring that capital projects fund down to $183,000 left over. You know, I'll further go over that, the revenue and expenses for the general fund when we go over the budget versus actual. Page 19. That's the activity of the sewer fund. The sewer fund ended with a total net position of $6,121,000, of which $5,804,000 is tied up in the net assets, which is comprised of the fixed asset piece minus the debt service, and then the unrestricted balance is the $316,000.
Just to interrupt there, that
Yeah,
$316,000, remember that was $9,500 the first year that I was here, so we're rolling down again.
Yeah, I was going to say it has been continually increasing.
Yep.
So it's been a positive balance. And if you go on page 20, it kind of skews that a little bit, because you'll see each year you typically will show a loss on this statement, but that is mostly because of depreciation. So there's depreciation charge of somewhere between $180,000 to $190,000 every year. So that's reflecting here as an expense, so that brings it to a loss, but that loss doesn't affect that $316,000. So it affects that the $5,804,000 on the previous page. So it doesn't affect the actual operating amount of the sewer fund. We can skip through the trust funds. There's also a breakdown of the trust funds that are in the footnotes. You can look at those later. There was not a major change on those. And then page 24. Through, I think it's increased this year to page 40. Are just your backup to some of those numbers in more detail. I won't go through those, it'll take a long time to go through to those, but it just gives you a lot more detail on each number, on a lot of the numbers on the financial statements, and breaks them down in more components. And then on exhibit 1, page 41, that's your budget versus actual, presented more in the way that you used to with getting the trigger reports each meeting or each month. And this is presented after the audit adjustments. You'll see that you're coming down to that same ending total fund balance of $3,659,000, of which not all of it is available for use, of course, for the next fiscal years. It's comprised of the committed as well as the assigned balances. But you can see the positives as variances in your revenues. You have a positive variance of $370,000, so you took in 370,000 more than what you anticipated. On your expenditure side, you spent 816,000 less than you anticipated. So your overall positive variances, budget variances were 1,186,000. So that contributed to that increase in overall fund balances. So you were anticipating taking money out of fund balance, but instead added some money back into it. So,
And that's good.
yes. Yes. Yeah. Some of it contributed, in fact, well, you anticipated some state revenue sharing going up because that increased quite a bit this year in 2020 fiscal year, but you had that built into your fund, into your budget already. Is there any questions on that schedule? And that's about it to go over. It's a lot to go over, but in a short amount of time. I would suggest again, like I mentioned each year, going through page, I think it starts at page 6, I think, the management discussion pages, so that page 6 through 12 gives you just a little more of a synopsis of the overall financials and a different wording. Kind of helps you understand a little bit more about the financials. So overall, it was a good audit, good financials, aside from the comments that I had, but I don't see any issues with that occurring again going forward. I think I witnessed and overseen some of the processes afterwards to see that they've been modified and corrected.